be with you.
Also with you.
Good. Some of you know that, right? Happy Star Wars Day. My youngest asked if that was going to come up in church today, so I had to make sure that it did. For those of you who know Star Wars, you know that throughout the storytelling in the movies, there would often be a greeting that would be expressed within those who understood the Jedi movement. When they parted ways, someone would say, "May the Force be with you." And so May the 4th is a lispy version of that, but it works for those who wanted an excuse to find a day to celebrate Star Wars, and that day is today. For us, as Episcopalians and anybody in the liturgical tradition, the great joy of the evolution of that in Star Wars is that for many years, decades in fact, whenever someone would say that, those like us would be whispering in the theater, "And also with you." But they never said that on screen until a few years ago during an episode of The Mandalorian, which is one of the series on Disney Plus, where somebody says, "May the Force be with you," and the person responded, "And also with you." And I'm pretty sure I shouted out something when I heard that. I was like, "Yes! Finally! It's about time." So Star Wars Day is not for everybody. It is a particular holiday of nerd culture. I am not fully in the nerd culture, but I am nerd culture adjacent, I will admit. And so I do love Star Wars, and I've seen most of what has been produced in that realm, except for the animated series. I've never been able to get into those. And for some people, they really don't care one way or the other, but if they even pay attention to Star Wars, they love it or they hate it. And unfortunately, I think it depends on what era of Star Wars you're raised on. And you can also tell what generation somebody is by what movies they like, because there's a lot of them now. Most of us here will know the original ones in the late 70s, early 80s that I grew up with, the original Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back, and The Return of the Jedi. Those are just classic movies in the sense of what a true classic really is. Those are the movies based around telling the story arc of Luke Skywalker, who is the main hero of that main spine of the Star Wars series. So you learn about how he comes about and how he discovers that he's got Jedi powers, how he discovers the way to harness those, and he can ultimately help save the galaxy from evil, the dark side. And that was good. We liked those movies. As campy as they could seem at some points, they were just really well done at the same time. And then George Lucas got the bright idea to tell some more of the story that existed in that world. And so back in the late 90s, maybe, I forget the exact dates because I've tried to block them out, created 3 more movies, another trilogy of prequels that set the stage for Luke Skywalker's parents and how Darth Vader comes about and all the things that we knew from the first 3 movies. I don't even remember what they're called because, like everybody, I just recall them episodes 1, 2, and 3 because I don't really care what they were called. They were okay. They were long. They were a little boring and dry. They had a lot of CGI and some really annoying characters. And for most folks, when you rank all the movies, they're towards the bottom. Don't say that name in church. He said the name of the long-eared, annoying guy. But again, there was more story to tell. George Lucas, as many of us know, literally sold out by selling the rights to Star Wars to the Disney Corporation for billions of dollars some years ago. And everybody wondered what would happen to Star Wars. Would Disney ruin it? Some think they have. Or would they do some amazing things? Some think they have. But they realized there was more to tell about the story of Luke Skywalker. So there's, among the other movies Disney has created, another trilogy, episodes 7, 8, and 9, that try to take the legacy of the original Star Wars, where we knew Luke was a hero, and fill out the rest of his story and the importance that he has in the bigger arc of a galaxy and a universe that's trying to move from the dark side, where people are imprisoned and persecuted and taken advantage of, and where there's lots of violence, to a vision that everybody has for a hopeful future of peace and security. So you have the Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and The Rise of Skywalker, if you know those movies or you want to go look them up. Those are the 7, 8, 9 in what we'll call the Skywalker series that are really about Luke Skywalker and his legacy. And in those last 3, you really get to see that Luke Skywalker's not just a hero. He becomes like his mentors and the people who led him. We all probably know the name Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda. And he becomes the same kind of Jedi master. He gets frustrated and burned out and crispy because the dark side continues to seem to win. It's always frustrating when evil triumphs over good. he kind of hides and he gives up, but he eventually comes out of hiding so that he can train a new Jedi. Actually, she has to go find him, and we learn that he has that sort of magi quality as a mentor, and ultimately represents a symbol of hope for everybody who wants to see the world and the universe and the galaxy moving in a positive direction. It took them 9 movies to tell the story. I think we're probably done with focus on Luke Skywalker. Now they're telling other stories and filling in gaps with shows and other films. But there's a lot to be told, and I guess if you're not done telling a story, you have to keep going. Now, let's talk about the gospel today. Because in John's gospel, what we hear today is basically that ancient equivalent that authors and screenwriters have used ever since, when the heart of the story has been told, when you've reached the peak of what you want to say, there's often still more to be said. You have to wrap up a few things. You can't stop right there. And so this is a little bit of an epilogue in John's gospel, where there's a little more to say after telling the story of Jesus' death and resurrection, and having Jesus appear to his disciples is not enough. If you think back to Mark's gospel and its original ending, Mark gets to the empty tomb and stops. That's where his story ends. Matthew and Luke and John all go past that, in part to shore up that there is this story of resurrection. But John and Luke in particular, with their stories, really are trying to convey something else at this last little piece that is there after Jesus' resurrection. And that is that although Jesus is certainly the focus of the Gospels, they exist to tell his story and the story of his life, his death, his sacrifice, and his life-giving resurrection. There's other stories being told in the Gospels at the same time, and one of those is the story of his disciples and the discipleship that we who read and hear these Gospels so many years later share as well. So we learn about his disciples as we learn about our discipleship at the same time. And part of what's happening in John in this epilogue is that the part about Jesus has been told. We have cemented who he is and what he does and what that means, but we left hanging what would happen to his disciples, who he had trained and asked to follow and given instructions. So the scene on the beach this morning is a little bit of that being tied up nicely for whatever will come next. You see the disciples learning from the echo of earlier in the gospel where Jesus could do amazing things with them on the boat, that now they don't even need Jesus on the boat. That if they'll just listen to him when they go out on their own, they can have this incredible catch of fish. Something that hopefully they will remember as they go about their ministry from this point forward. We also get the sense that there's some other character lines that need to be cleaned up. Peter is a pretty important person in the church. His leadership is central to who we are. And you can sense John not wanting to leave that, with the last real time we dealt with Peter being his denial. And so John has carefully crafted the way he tells his story and the words he uses. So the charcoal fire on the beach is supposed to mirror the charcoal fire at Jesus' trial, where Peter denied Jesus 3 times. Now Jesus asks 3 times, "Do you love me?" And Peter has a chance to say yes and kind of erase that moment in his discipleship. And it's also a moment, of course, where we see now the Good Shepherd handing off his shepherd's staff to Peter and the disciples, saying, "Here, you all will be taking it from here. You feed my sheep. All the people that I've said I'm here to gather into one flock, this is now your work." And so this epilogue gives us a little bit of a sense of what the work of discipleship and the work of the church will be. And John doesn't have a sequel the way Luke does. So Luke's sequel is the book of Acts. You have the gospel, you have the preparation for the church, and then the book of Acts tells you about how the church came to be. But you can see where John just opens the door. It's like the movies that you watch in those last few minutes where you see the hero get back to the farm, or you see somebody reunited, or you realize that the romance has indeed been kindled. Whatever it is, there's always those last little things that make us feel good about how a story ended, or make us mad when we don't get it. And we're like, what? That's the end? That's it? We don't know exactly what John may have said the sequel to this was, but at least he set it up that clearly it's not the end of the story when he finishes writing his gospel. And in some ways, it's the beginning. Which makes more sense if you think of it chronologically, that Jesus' life and ministry on this earth was 33 years, followed by those three, well, the last three being what we hear about most in the gospel. And we've had thousands of years of ministry afterwards as well. It's pretty impressive that it took 9 movies to talk about Luke Skywalker. We're 2,000 years and counting, telling and living the story of Jesus as a result. And that's what we're doing, because we have inherited that legacy from the beach on that morning after Jesus had been raised from the dead. In the same way that we inherit the legacy of Peter, who was the first pope, as our Catholic brethren would say, as they prepare to choose their next pope. Peter was the first shepherd of the church, and the Catholic Church believes that those popes are still in that line of shepherds. He's important enough that the seat that the preacher sits in, where Mother Ashton is today, when you come to communion, if you take notice, it's the symbol of St. Peter. It's an upside-down cross and the cross keys that are the symbol of his role of leading the church and the kingdom, so to speak. So we've inherited that. We've inherited the conversion of Paul and its legacy on him and on the church, as he and Peter then argue in the early church, as the book of Acts tells us, about who's in and who's out. Is it just for Jews? Is it for Gentiles? Ultimately deciding it's for everybody. We've inherited the legacy of those early Christians who formed the creeds as we know them, who chose the scriptures that we would read to this day. We've inherited the legacy of the desert mothers and fathers who went away to teach and to study and to pass on the faith to others, that were ultimately responsible for the formation of monasticism, which helped the church not just survive some very dark centuries, but eventually thrive and in turn change the Western world dramatically. We have inherited the legacy of those Christians in England when they decided that they were moved by the Reformation movement and had an idea for a different way of being church, and ultimately deciding on a model that brought Catholics and Protestants together. We are inheritors of the legacy of those 2 Anglican priests named Wesley, who got off the boat over here at Fort Frederica. We are inheritors of the legacy of the Christians in this country when we decided we wanted to be an independent nation, who also thought the church needed to be independent too, and created the Episcopal Church with close ties to the Church of England, but no longer under its authority. This parish has inherited the legacy of Anson Dodge, who, with the support of the vision of his first wife and his life with his second wife, gave us this church among many others that he built, and all the ministries that he endowed in his lifetime. And we realize we've inherited the legacy of all and so many who have come before us, each of whom were writing their own chapters in the story that begins on that beach at the end of John's Gospel. Now, this week I rambled about legacy, and you're hearing about it in the sermon in part because this is the Sunday that we set apart to talk about legacy at Christ Church as we think through our calendar and our lives as stewards. And we've been talking in recent years about the threefold form of stewardship, that one of those is legacy giving. We have the regular giving we do on an ongoing basis that makes the ministry of the church go. We have occasional special fundraising for the really big stuff that doesn't fit into budgets, when you have to fix roofs or build something or move something. And then legacy is the giving aspect of our stewardship that says we can do something with all of our life in the same way to preserve the ministry and the mission of the church. And so during the announcements, Don Baker will come up and tell you a little bit about the Dodge Society in anticipation of a mailing you're all going to get this week. But legacy is not just stewardship of finances. That's where it comes into the conversation, in our conversation as a parish about stewardship. But the truth is, everything we have in the church has been given to us to be stewards of. We are stewards of the gospel. We are stewards of the good news of Jesus Christ. We are stewards of the way that Paul originally fought against and then became a part of. We are stewards of the work for those who follow that gospel, to seek out justice for those who don't have it, to be voices for the voiceless, to find the places where people are hungry and feed them, or lonely and visit them, or sick and comfort them. That's all part of that legacy that's entrusted to every generation of disciples when somebody hands us that staff and says, "Here, go feed my sheep. Go proclaim the good news. Go baptize in the name of Jesus. Go serve as his hands and feet." The gospel is not the end of anything. It feels like a story that has a beginning and the end because it's so old and we read it all the time and we know its beginning and its end. But it is a story that is, in fact, not finished. That is still being written. The sequels are unending, which is quite amazing. No one's gotten tired of them yet. In fact, the world is yearning for those sequels on a daily basis. And so the invitation of this Sunday, as we hear about the disciples seeing Jesus, trusting that he is who he says he is, even when there's some question, again, like there was on the road to Emmaus, that if it feels like Jesus is with us, Jesus promised to be with us, then Jesus must be with us. And to remember that Jesus is with this generation of authors as well. As we treasure the chapters that have come before that helped write the story of the gospel and the church that got us to today, and allow us to figure out what we're going to do, what we're going to write with our lives, so that there are people who will yet come after us to hear that good news and inherit these places and these communities, who will hopefully write chapters for many, many years to come.